beneath. So can you please welcome David Clegg?
I'm going to refer to my notes to stop me rambling. I should say, just before I kick off, I do have a weird connection to the first talk, which is when I was about 19, I accidentally ended up running a club in Sunderland. And I put on the Clash when they were touring. And the only photograph of the event is I haven't got any trousers on. I'm standing next to the stage with no trousers because the Clash just turned up. And people from the art school knocked on my door, and I had the keys to the club, so I let them in, but I had my dressing gown on. So it was just down the road, so folly. Okay, I'm going to try and read the opening for this. So this talk is about something unexpected that I discovered beneath my house in Hastings. And it relates to the idea that sometimes a house finds you. So when I was a child, I wanted to be a lighthouse keeper. And then I wanted to be a vet. And then I wanted to be an archaeologist. And so naturally I went off to art school. And I opened an art gallery and I ran a bookshop for quite a long time. And for years I collected stories told by people with dementia. And they were often stories about work and memory and place. And I travelled around the UK with a photographer documenting outsider art environments, which is kind of shell grottos and follies and those kind of things, handmade landscapes made by people who haven't been trained in art. And they're all areas that were at risk of being destroyed, mainly due to property development and weathering and that kind of thing. So I just want to show you a few of the places that I visited, and it ties in to this idea. So this is a place that became known as Little Italy in Powys. And one of the things that really interests me about this work was that what got me into it is, first of all, I love untrained art. But secondly, I'd read loads of magazine articles in which the stories didn't match the reality. And I was kind of interested in truth, having worked with a lot of people with dementia. So they make up stories, they sometimes invent things, but sometimes they don't. And sometimes I would do research and find out the person that I was working with genuinely was the first person ever on British television, or he was a gunner on the ship that sank the Bismarck. And they were real. But these stories about these places, this is, as I say, was called Little Italy. And I went to speak to the person who actually owned the site. And it turned out that the maker of this place never called it Little Italy. It was called Mark's Folly because they thought he was bonkers. And basically he made models of the buildings that he liked in Italy. This is when he was about 80 years old, and he carried bags of cement up the hill and made the Pantheon and about 50 or 60 buildings on a Welsh hillside. Absolutely fantastic. And the stories in the press were that he was a chicken farmer, and they cast him as an eccentric. The reality was that he owned a caravan park, and he was a businessman, but it didn't fit that narrative of untrained art, so they made something up. This is, oh God, this is the cement menagerie in Branxton Village. And again, the story told about this is completely untrue. And I'll tell you at the end because I'm being filmed, but the reality is a bit sad. But the story that's often repeated about this isn't true. And every house needs a life-size giraffe. And this has two made of concrete. Absolutely fantastic. And we got there about a month before that site was cleared. Aren't they wonderful? God knows what they are, but they are wonderful. That's Rory McCormack, who is the last fisherman using a boat off Brighton Beach. And he made a grotto out of flint from the beach. Absolutely incredible. Just strange animals that took his fancy. And the story, of course, in the press was that he's battling with Brighton Council. He isn't. Brighton Council are okay with it. By the way, doesn't he look fantastic? And of course, the first message when I tried to contact him, what people said is, he's scary, he's got a fishing knife and he will gut you. We got on like a house on fire. I went to see him 3 times and I now own one of his pieces of work. The only piece he's ever sold for actually a lot of money. Okay, that's his allotment. So he was given an allotment to grow fruit and vegetables, and of course he made enormous Egyptian deities. What more could you ask? So while I was doing that, I eventually moved to Folkestone, and I moved into a really dilapidated but very grand flat. And this flat had the most incredible history. It had been the birthplace of Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Churchill's private secretary lived there. A diamond smuggler died there. But by the time we got there, well, it was in Folkestone, it had gone downhill. And the garden was just filled with rubbish. There was a broken toilet, there was an awful lot of syringes. And I was renovating the place with my partner, and we heard stories from neighbours that there used to be the most incredible garden. And it was made by a chap called Mr. Grace, who was a dentist. And some of the old people in the area remembered Mr. Grace running a dental surgery from his living room. He'd pull their teeth out in the living room. But he also made this incredible, elaborate art garden, which was a model of Kingsnorth Garden, which was directly opposite. So this was photographed, I think, in the 1950s, and this is the garden as it was. When I got there, it was completely buried. It was completely derelict. And as I was clearing the land, I found it. And it was underneath the surface. It was about 4 or 5 inches down. And we found the remains of this garden. Tiny set of steps, all handmade, completely buried. Dry stone walls 4 centimeters high. And that notion of truth kind of links this whole thing of finding something that's tangible, that you can put your hands on, that makes it real. It's not like one of the stories about the outsider artists. This is real because I can touch it. This was what was really there. It's good, isn't it? Right. So this is my house when I moved into Hastings, because as I was doing this, I was actually packing boxes to leave Folkestone. Moved into this house and it was kind of derelict. It didn't look like this. And, hang on, that's not clicking. This is my house, surrounded by the Red Square. I mean, this obviously isn't now. The next door, the pub got bombed. Has anyone heard of the Swan Hotel? The Swan Hotel, this is opposite St. Clement's Church. My house is right next door to it. And as you can see, it's kind of elevated. No, I've got a pointer. Cool. So my house is built on a weird platform. So when we came to see it, it was quite strange. We didn't really understand what was going on. But the house still was bomb damaged. So we took on this renovation, this massive renovation. This is what you came out for this evening, to see the demolition of an outside toilet. So, renovating the house. By the way, I've got to say, we know that at one point in the 1990s, a previous occupant of the house knocked through her living room floor to find out what was under the platform. And what she saw was a very big, very dark, very wet and very muddy space. And basically, I think probably shut the trapdoor and didn't go down there very much. So by the time we got in, we took on this renovation. And I decided to demolish the outside loo, as you do. So this is mid-demolition. And then I started to smash through the floor to remove the pipe. So you can see there's a big black void underneath here. There it is. So this is under the floor of my terrace. And this is the state of it when we got down. It was basically about ankle deep in mud and very smelly, very wet. There were freshwater leeches swimming around in the pools. And after about 6 months of ignoring it, because we were doing other renovations, we decided to try and clear it and tidy it up. And so this is mid-hell. And underneath all this debris and mud and bones and pottery, we found a layer of cobbles. And this is lime plaster. We were going to take the cobbles up and reset them, and I discovered that the original lime plaster was there that they were set in. They're beach pebbles. So that's when we started to clean it up. It had a cobbled floor. And we realized from looking at the plans that what we had was the coach house of the Swan Hotel. And it was the last remaining part of the grandest building on the south coast, under my floor, under the toilet, and behind that wall. And that is the stable yard of the Swan, photographed in 1860 by a chap called Francis Frith. And my coach house is directly underneath here. Cool photograph. So this is what we had. This is the original plan from my house, drawn by the architect Henry Ward, who built a pub very near here. Stephen, what is it called? The Bohemian? Okay. So these are the arches of the coach house under my house. And my house is built on top of it. And that's what it looks like now we've cleared it up. So it's 800 square feet. So we removed all the mud. We carried 200 bags of mud up the stairs. This is quite an amazing thing, because when the house was built on top, Hastings Council basically said they weren't very happy with the design, clearly, and they wrote a letter to the builder and said they have to build this pillar to hold the weight of the house. And when we moved in, they'd built the pillar, but they'd left it one brick short. And it didn't actually connect to the bottom of the house. And 130 years after the house was built, we put the last brick in. It's just nuts. And it survived a bomb. So as you can see, on the floor, you've got the tracks for the coaches that would have come in. Yes, that's the brick that we put in at the top. So it's now accessible. This is a lovely thing. We've had 5 open days, and we've had about 1,000 people have walked through this cellar, come down the steps. And we thought that there is some woodwork around the door frames. The original door frames are still there on a couple of the vaults. And we thought that this was just that it was rotting away. But can you see they're concave? And a child pointed out it's not decayed, it's the impact of the coach wheels as the coach came in. So that is the evidence of how they were used. And they're the hinges that are still there. There's even fittings for gas lights. It was the first cobbled surface in Hastings, by the way. And it shamed the council into fixing the roads. And they've got worse. And not very long ago, we were cleaning up the debris on the back wall, and we discovered that you can still see the chisel marks from when the stones were removed from the wall, which is significant because we started to look at how old the building actually was. So we went to the Keep in Brighton and started to go through loads of the old plans, many of which have not been open for a very, very long time. So that's the first plan. So we live above this. Our house is here. And the remains of the stable block is under the floor. It says stables, it was coach house before. It changed use several times. That's an earlier plan. The interesting thing about this plan is this is about 1770, and although the coach house isn't there, the back wall of my cellar actually is. So it has to be older than 1770. That's the same thing. That's where our house is. Right, I can knock it back even earlier. This is the earliest plan of Hastings. This is a detail from the earliest plan of Hastings, 1850. So, the back wall, that is at the back wall of our cellar, 1750. But we think it's much, much older than that. Because some of the houses, the back wall supports a very large terrace, and the terrace supports a row of very ancient houses running along to St. Clement's Church. And some of those houses, they've been modified at the top, but below ground, they have ecclesiastical features, like this staircase. And we now think that the back wall of our cellar once supported a church garden and a chantry house. And the chantry house was a religious school building, but it was off the site of the church. And the chantry house was absorbed into the Swan Hotel in about 1530 with the dissolution of the monasteries. So they had a brewery, you might as well make it into an inn. Again, that's what you want on a Wednesday night, the dissolution of the monasteries and the demolition of a toilet. Okay, so 1530. But we think it can go back even further. I'll come back to him. I like him. We think there's evidence that goes back to 1380. And we think now that the back wall of our vaults is possibly the second oldest standing structure in Hastings. The only thing that's older is the castle. So if we can get rid of that, that would be very good. But in all this sort of looking through archived documents and manuscripts, looking at all this kind of stuff, I'm sometimes asked what my favorite discovery is. Oh, wrong thing. And it's him. He's a tiny, tiny detail, a tiny man on the earliest map in Hastings. And it's the first depiction of a named Hastings resident. Can you see what it says? His name is Halliday. And it's written underneath. And when I saw him, I thought, oh, this is great. He's got a lovely hat on. He's probably a shrimp fisherman. Mr. Halliday, I'll find out who he is. Well, it didn't take me long to find out that his name was Lawrence Halliday, and he was a barber. And what you're seeing is that Mr. Halliday went up to Barley Lane in Hastings to see one of his patrons and cut his throat. And he stole his money and was chased through the town and climbed down the cliff. What you're seeing there was captured at the bottom, was hung and gibbeted on the East Hill. So the first depicted person named, the first named person from Hastings is Mr. Halliday, and he's a murderer. And I don't think that connection had been discovered until we discovered it. So what lies beneath, coming back to the original question, for us, is actually an elaborate folk art garden, a 14th century wall, the oldest structure in Hastings, and a murderer running for his life. There you go. More than...
Brilliant. Thank you, David. Thank you very much.